Hello everyone and welcome back to Dragalia Foundry, a fan channel where everything Dragalia Lost can be found. Today's video is the first in my Build Basics series, where I'll be exploring all of the dragons, weapons, and wyrmprints players can use to equip and outfit their adventurers within Dragalia Lost. I'm creating this series around a month after the game's launch, but hopefully the method of analysis presented here can help inform your decision making, even as new gear and dragons release in the months to come. The focus for this video is dragons, but let me start with some general thoughts on builds and what they mean in Dragalia Lost. As I mentioned, adventurers in Dragalia Lost can be equipped with three things: a dragon, a wyrmprint, and a weapon. And in the broadest sense, these three things constitute a build. Taking a step back, however, there's been some discussion about whether suggesting builds even makes sense in Dragalia Lost, and whether the options currently available offer much room for player choice. The answer to that is complicated, but if you'll allow it, here's my opinion after working on this series. My biggest takeaway is this: there is no vacuum or neutral content in Dragalia Lost. Every quest and endeavor in the game presents a specific challenge, and this means that while a one-size-fits-all build can work, it isn't always going to be optimal strategically. The best builds in Dragalia Lost are silver bullets, highly situational sets designed to overcome specific maps or circumstances. This explains why a 2-star wyrmprint, Dragon Arcanum, was terrific for beating the Loyalty's Requiem raid in under 1 minute, why the free wyrmprint Plunder Pals was crucial to grinding out the Trick or Treasure event, and why the 5-star wyrmprint Glorious Tempest is necessary for high Midgard Stormer. So events tend to funnel players in certain build directions in Dragalia Lost, especially when it comes to wyrmprints. But how about dragons and weapons? While there is some flexibility, and we'll be exploring that throughout this series, here too the best picks tend to be pretty cut and dry. The ideal choices tend to be the highest rarity options available, as long as they're aligned with the given adventurer's element. That said, a few factors still facilitate player choice, and it's that big picture nuance we'll be exploring in this series. When it comes to weapons, higher rarity ones are costly. Significant progression and event materials are needed to start forging tier 2 5-star weapons, so prioritization becomes a factor. And when it comes to dragons and wyrmprints, the gacha system means that not everyone has everything at their disposal, which also adds some needed variety and is part of why I hope this video is helpful. And all of this is before considering team building and composition, which adds yet another layer of choice. Alright, with that bit of reflection out of the way, let me add 2 quick disclaimers before we start talking dragons. First, the data from this video come from Gamepedia and GamePress. I've done my best to double check everything, but please say so if you think anything needs correcting or clarifying. Not all data is available yet either, including dragon's skill damage, so please keep that in mind. Second, this analysis is entirely my own, based on limited experience as a free-to-play player. All my summons have been recorded on this channel, low-key plug to check out those videos if you haven't, and I certainly haven't unlocked or pulled everything I'll be talking about today. Since that means I'll be talking about how these dragons look on paper rather than in practice, definitely let me know with a comment below if your experience or opinion differs from my own. And of course, I'm talking strategy here, but don't let that deter you from using a dragon just because you really like them or their story. Now, onto the topic at hand. I'll begin by reviewing some basic facts about dragons, then I'll give the lay of the land of all dragons currently available, and finally I'll go through each element one by one. Timestamps are below if you wish to skip ahead. I have to start with the most common mistake I see players make when it comes to dragons to this day. Always align the element of your dragons with your adventurers. This is going to be the right move 99% of the times, with few if any exceptions in the game as it stands now. fact that the game starts you with the Flame Adventurer and Wind Dragon, plus the Optimize button prioritizing might, perpetuates the mistake of pairing off-element dragons and adventurers, which can really weaken your units overall. There are two reasons why you want to match up dragon and adventurer element. For one, dragons have stat boosting abilities which only work if the adventurer they're equipped to is aligned to the same element. This can range from a 5% boost to both HP and strength, all the way up to a massive 60% boost to a single stat, and these abilities won't work if you mismatch elements. The second reason is perhaps even more important. The raw stats provided by a dragon are boosted by 50% when the adventurer they're paired with is attuned to the same element, and this is before dragon abilities are even applied. Neither of these status boosts count toward might either, so you could easily end up with higher real stats, HP and offense, by using an on-element dragon, even if your might looks lower. I seriously can't stress enough how important matching dragon and adventurer elements is. The second tip relates more to gameplay. You probably know how dragons work in Dragalia Lost if you've made it this far into the video. You build up a shapeshift meter and bam, voila, dragon. You'll pick this up as you play the game more, but being strategic with your transformation is a good idea. This is more of a general tip than something build related, but try to have a plan for shapeshifting. You can use it to break an enemy boss, then wail on them in dragon form, or to avoid a powerful enemy attack using an invincibility frame, or even to quickly dispose of enemy reinforcements once summoned. The reason this ties into builds is that different unit types depend on shapeshifting in different ways. If you're playing a healer, you may really want to save that dragon to dish out damage after breaking the boss with your force strikes. If you're an archer and have trouble with crowd control, maybe it's better to use your dragon to clear out mobs, giving you space to set up against a boss. Knowing what your character is trying to accomplish can help you improve your play and build substantially. Next up, we get into the minutia of how dragons are powered up and upgraded within the game. Dragon fruit is used to level up dragons, and it can be obtained through the Dragon Tree facility in the Halidom. Dragon level determines HP and strength stats. Dragons also have a bond level that determines shapeshift duration, and bond levels can be raised from 1 up to 30 through the Dragon's Roost by giving dragons gifts from a shop that resets daily. Because the number of gifts sold in the shop is limited each day, and other ways of raising bonds are scarce, I strongly encourage you to always buy out the Dragon Roost shop every day. Besides increasing shapeshift duration, dragons give players valuable rewards every time you give them gifts, including things like mana, dragon scales, and elemental orbs. Some important milestones are bond levels 5 and 15, where you can unlock dragon stories that grant Wyrmite upon reading, and the max bond level of 30, which provides 1 sunlight ore. Head over to the treasure trade area of the game, and 10 sunlight ore can be exchanged for 1 sunlight stone, a special item that unbinds any 5-star dragon once. More on unbinding later, but suffice to say, this is a very precious commodity. When it comes to which dragons you should prioritize when forging bonds, a tip is that each dragon has a favorite gift, which will provide them additional bond experience, which I'll shorten to BXP. Smaller gifts appear every day, while favorite items rotate out during weekdays. Here's a glance of each dragon's favorite gift. Since I know this is a lot of info to take in at once, even if you do pause the video, I'll link to Gamepedia's article on the same topic in the description below. Not to dwell on bonds too long, weekends include the Golden Chalice, which gives even more BXP than favorites at a slightly higher cost, and the final gift is the 4-leaf clover, which is a login bonus that some rare foes also drop during quests. One strategy for those of you who have time to spare but want to save stamina is to give up on the Avenue to Power and Avenue to Fortune maps until you spawn and defeat a rare enemy. That's the only reliable way to farm clovers and BXP that I know of for now. So now that you know gifts are needed to increase bond levels, and that dragon fruit increases regular levels, let's talk through a few things to keep in mind when you decide how to spend those resources. The first table shows some reward milestones, and that the total BXP needed to level up steepens increasingly as your bond with a given dragon grows. Ignoring favorites and clovers for a moment, if you give everything in the shop to a single dragon, it takes 1 day to reach bond level 10, 2 days to reach bond level 15, and around 11 days to reach bond level 30. For newer players, myself included, I suggest sharing the love among your dragons and focusing on getting as many as you can to bond level 15 first, starting with your 5-star and 4-star ones. You can get 5 dragons up to level 15 in the time it'd take you to max out 1 dragon, and you'll collect milestone rewards more regularly this way. Once you pass that point, start with your most used, favorite, or strongest dragon, typically a 5-star or 4-star from the gacha pool, and start getting them up to 30 while saving favorite items for a matching dragon. Eventually you will want to get as many dragons as you can to bond level 30 anyway, since Sunlight Ore is only obtained that way, or through limited time events like the game's first raid. Then there's regular experience, or EXP, where requirements also steepen the higher level you go. Since increasing this doesn't grant rewards, here I recommend focusing on your strongest dragons first. To fully level 1 5-star dragon, you need more than 8,000 dragon fruit, or 1,200 ripe dragon fruit, or 350 succulent dragon fruit. And while I can't tell you exactly how much fruit the dragon tree produces daily, since there seems to be some randomness involved, I can say this is a ton of materials, so it will take some time to get there. Fortunately, you can also grind dragon fruit through the dragon trials. I should also add that this calculation is for a fully unbound 5-star dragon, meaning its level cap has reached its ceiling of 100. And on that note, let's get into the topic of unbinding and, more generally, what to do with spare copies of dragons. One choice is to get rid of spare copies altogether. From the collection menu, you can part ways with any dragons you have in order to obtain rupees and, more importantly, Eldwater. This table shows the exchange rates, with gacha dragons generally granting more rewards than free or event dragons. As a general rule of thumb, I suggest you keep at least 1 of each unique dragon, keep extra copies of 4 and 5-star dragons, and sell extra copies of 3-star dragons. Try to also have at least 4 dragons of each element. My caveat to this is that there is no rush to sell unless you already filled out your storage or have an unusually urgent need for Eldwater. The more important use for spare copies is unbinding, which I alluded to before. Unlike adventurers, gear like dragons, weapons, and wyrmprints can't be promoted in star rarity. Instead, extra copies can be spent to unbind those objects, up to 4 times total. Note that unbinding itself doesn't raise stats. For dragons, unbinding has 2 main effects. First, every additional unbinding raises a dragon's max level cap, with the thresholds determined by star rarity, as the bottom table shows. Leveling up a dragon after raising its cap is where extra stats come from on unbound dragons. The difference in max levels across rarities is part of why a rarer event dragon with generally weaker stats, like Pele, can surpass some lower rarity gacha dragons with higher stats, like Ifrit, if you lack extra copies of those gacha dragons. Sometimes the sheer fact that the max level is higher or you lack copies can make the difference, even though those extra level ups will cost a lot of dragon fruit. The second effect of unbinding is that a dragon which has been fully unbound, meaning you spent 4 extra copies to do so, also has upgraded abilities and skills. Typically, this amounts to higher skill damage and a percentage point increase to the ability buff dragons provide to equipped adventurers of the same element. Even though the level cap goes up incrementally, the upgrade to skills and abilities is all or nothing. You only get it once you dump 4 extra copies of a dragon into your original one, and this tends to mean you should wait on unbinding until you can go all the way, since you can always equip multiple team members with the same dragon for the time being. This all or nothing nature of unbinding is also what makes the Sunlight Stone item mentioned before so important. It's unlikely that you'll pull 5 total copies of a 5-star gacha dragon to fully unbind it, so saving up Sunlight Ores is how most low to moderate spending players will eventually do so. The description for Sunlight Stones specifically mentions 5-star dragons, but it is possible it could be used to unbind any dragon, including 4 stars. I'm not sure of that, but because these are so rare, I do encourage you to save them for 5-star gacha dragons, generally speaking. The last little note I'll make before moving on is that unbinding is an irreversible process, so think very carefully before you undertake it. Will 2 level 40 Nidhogg's help you more, or 1 level 55 Nidhogg? The answer depends on the amount of shadow dragons available to you, the other shadow adventurers you tend to use regularly, whether there's an upcoming light event, and so on. For me personally, I find the dragon fruit cost is a bit too high to keep dragons separated and level both up, so I usually pull the trigger early on unbinding, but that's just my preference. I wouldn't say this is a good idea in general. Thankfully, the game is pretty forgiving when it comes to unbinding and parting ways. When you do decide to part ways with the dragon, you'll also receive rupees and Eldwater from the top table times the number of times you unbound the dragon. So if you overinvested in a 3-star dragon by unbinding it too many times, you can always wait until you pull a fresh copy, then sell the old, unbound one, and still reap the same total rewards. Okay, with all of that basic advice out of the way, let's get into the specifics, starting with a bird's eye view of every dragon currently in the game before diving deep element by element. Once again, this is a lot of information to take in, so let me explain what my focus is here. By looking at all dragons as a whole, we can observe a few distinct trends and patterns, or what I'd call design cycles. Once you see that many dragons function similarly across elements, it's easier to grasp the big picture and characterize each individual dragon at a glance alone. The 3-star gacha dragons provide a great example of what I'm talking about. I would split these into 3 cycles: the named dragons, the imps, and the drakes. Each dragon in these cycles has the same ability and fairly close stats, 1 or 2 points off within a cycle, with the abilities being element specific. Basically, the named dragons boost strength, the drakes boost HP, and the imps provide a smaller, mixed boost to both strength and HP. This is also reflected in these dragons' raw stats themselves. The named dragons have the most strength, the drakes are the most tanky, and the imps are most balanced. Note that the stats I'm showing here are maximums before factoring in the 50% same element bonus. This pattern of offense-focused, defense-focused, and balanced is pervasive across all rarities. Moving on to 4 stars, we have another clear cycle of gacha aggro dragons whose abilities boost strength, this time by 30 or 45% once fully unbound. Remember, as with all dragons, these abilities are element specific. Where the pattern breaks down a bit is when it comes to mixed and defense dragons from the 4-star gacha pool. I believe this is primarily because these cycles are currently incomplete, and I suspect we'll see holes or question marks filled in as new summon showcases release. Otherwise, we see that the mixed 4-star gacha dragons grant 15 or 20% to both stats, and the defensive ones grant 30 or 45% to HP alone. However, there are 2 details I'd like to point out. One is that Halloween Silk might be in a separate category, in the sense that we'll also get a mixed light 4-star in the normal summoning pool one day. The second detail is about Phoenix. As I'll get into later in this video, Phoenix is an amazing and unique dragon. But even though she solely boosts HP, just like Unicorn and Strabog, it's possible Phoenix may represent her own category or a separate cycle, not of defenders per se, but of healers. And I'll talk more about that when we focus in on flame dragons. Up next, we have one more 4-star cycle, but this is more of a thematic one than a functional one. The story dragons, or great worms, are obtained by playing through a Dragalia Lost campaign, with additional copies accessible by cashing in spheres earned in Dragon Trials in the treasure trade area of the shop. The Great Worms provide various ability buffs. Mercury's just boosts HP, Brunhilde and Zodiark's just boost strength, and Midgard Sormer and Jupiter's boost both stats to a lesser degree. The thing these dragons have in common mechanically is that, frankly, their stats and abilities are nerfed compared to 4-star gacha dragons. Comparing their stat range to the other 4-star dragons we've looked at so far, it's clear the Great Worms are intentionally weaker to encourage and reward summoning via gacha. Overall, taking into account their easy to fully unbind, the Great Worms end up somewhere between their 3-star and 4-star gacha counterparts. Last up, we come to the 5-star dragons. This is certainly the smallest pool, which makes sense since new ones will make a splash as they're added to the game. 3 dragons are focused on offense: Leviathan, Agni, and Zephyr. 2 are balanced: Poseidon and Nidhogg, and 1 is focused on defense: Jeanne d'Arc. You can immediately observe that the abilities are stronger at base with higher percent buffs than those of 4 stars and 3 stars of the same focus. So, for example, Jeanne d'Arc provides a larger percent buff to HP and has higher stats than Unicorn, and Unicorn in turn is generally better than Moondrake. There are 2 more 5-star dragons besides those from the gacha pool. High Midgard Sormer is the first one, and I expect he'll eventually be joined by high versions of all the other Great Worms as well. His ability buff is mixed, just like the normal 4-star Midgard Sormer, and his stats are slightly below those of a typical 5-star gacha dragon. This is balanced somewhat by the fact that High Midgard Sormer is currently unique in that he has a second ability, but we'll talk about him more when we focus in on the wind element. The last 5-star dragon currently in the game isn't really part of any cycle so far: Pele, an event reward from Loyalty's Requiem. Unlike High Midgard Sormer, her stats are considerably worse than most gacha 5 stars, but the fact that it was fairly easy to obtain 5 copies of her does compensate for this somewhat. But let's get into that more as we run through each dragon element by element starting now with Flame. The reason I think it's so important to break down which dragons to use by element is because, as I mentioned before, you should almost always match your adventurer and dragon elements together. When you think about which dragons are competing for a spot in a build, it's most appropriate to limit your scope to the element of the adventurer you're working on. Right now, there are exactly 8 dragons of each element except Shadow, for which there are only 7. I'll start with Flame, then Water, Wind, Shadow, and Light. Beginning with Flame, allow me to explain a few details on what's being shown about each dragon, starting with the 3 stars, Homura, Cinderdrake, and Kindling Imp. The stats I'll be showing for each dragon are max HP and max strength after tacking on the 50% same element attunement bonus. Showing these with the bonus provides a clearer picture of how big the gap is between dragons of a given element, since applying a 50% boost to everything also widens the difference in stats by 50%. These values are rounded to the nearest whole number, and I should remind you that they do not reflect stats at intermediate levels or unbinding states, so I'll bring that up separately when relevant. Also note that I am not factoring in the same element ability boosts to HP, strength, or a mix of both, since the actual stat numbers gained from those depend on the adventurer you're equipping the dragon to. Instead, I've just listed the percent boost for each ability, both at base and once fully unbound. Finally, I also present the skill name and graphical indicator. The graphic typically tells us what the hit pattern of the skill is like, but there is some variance even within graphic types. The fact is that skills are still the murkiest area when it comes to dragons, so I won't be focusing on that too much. Neither Gamepedia nor GamePress report dragon skill damage or duration at the time of making this video. Anecdotally, I have noticed that higher rarity dragons tend to have stronger skills, and that some skill descriptions aren't complete, either in-game or in online resources. So as we go through each dragon, I'll be sure to point out any noteworthy special effects, whether listed in the skill description or otherwise observed by me during actual gameplay. And with the technical stuff out of the way, let's properly get into it. I already mentioned the 3-star flame dragons, Homura, Cinderdrake, and Kindling Imp. At 4-star, we have Brunhilde, Ifrit, and Phoenix, and at 5-star, we have Pele and Agni. As I said before, the skill descriptions are murky, with a few noteworthy things here being Brunhilde's ability to move when using her Muspelheim attack, and Phoenix's regenerative flame skill, which heals all allies and grants a regen effect for 15 seconds. I'll also add from personal experience that although this isn't mentioned in the skill description in-game, I have noticed that Pele's skill inflicts burn, so it's possible some of these other skills do as well. So when it comes to building your flame units, how do you select from among these dragons? Thinking through this will inform us about other elements, and more generally about how to evaluate new units in the future. I would suggest you start by asking yourself what goal your unit is trying to accomplish. If your adventurer is an attack role, they almost certainly want a dragon whose ability boosts strength. If they are a healer role, they probably want a dragon whose ability boosts HP, since the working theory for how healing skills are calculated is that they scale much more with HP than with strength. Tanks and support roles are a bit more flexible, and your strategy there will depend on the other components of your build and your kit. Generally speaking, start by looking at what dragons you have for the element you're going for. With rare exceptions, any 4-star or 5-star will surpass the 3-star choices available to you. From there, pick the dragon who confers the largest ability boost to the stat your unit cares most about, be that HP or strength. This may mean you pick a 4-star over a 5-star if the 4-star has been unbound sufficiently or covers a stat that the 5-star options do not. Returning to the flame pool in particular, this would mean that you should try to use Brunhilde, Pele, Ifrit, or Agni for attackers, and Phoenix for healers, with any choice among those justifiable for support units and defenders. And Elaine is the only flame defender, actually. Looking at the percentages on each ability, Pele is generally better than Brunhilde. A fully unbound Pele is in the ballpark of a regular Ifrit with 1 or 2 unbindings, and an Agni eclipses everything except a fully unbound Ifrit until Agni itself is fully unbound. The reason I suggest trying to avoid the 3-stars, except to round out your flame team, is basically because both their raw stats and the abilities they grant are weaker, even once you fully unbind them. But if, for instance, you don't have a Phoenix for your flame healer like Verica or Orion, using a Cinder Drake or Kindling Imp are going to be decent alternatives, not to mention Agni, purely since its stats are so high. This is especially true since the flame element currently lacks balanced or mixed dragons at 4-star and 5-star. Let me pay special attention to Phoenix though, since her skill is genuinely unique among all current dragons. She's the only dragon that can heal across all elements, a utility which truly broadens her applications. Phoenix can be justified on pretty much any flame unit, especially on a team which lacks a proper healer, just by virtue of her skill being so useful. She'll be most beneficial to units who care about HP, but slapping her on your Yuden instead of Brunhilde or Pele isn't awful. The other thing I've seen some players do is put Phoenix on non-flame healers like Hildegard. I don't suggest this strategy for most players, since like I've said lots in this video, the stat bonuses from matching Adventurer and Dragon elements are too good to ignore. Despite that, I can see someone making the case that Phoenix's skill is good enough to justify her use off element, so long as other healing dragons don't exist. The trade-off, I'd argue, is that your healing skills, when not transformed, are going to be much weaker than if you had just used a dragon of a matching element like Unicorn or Jeanne d'Arc in the case of Hildegard. So while I think Phoenix is outstanding, I still recommend sticking to Flame Adventurers when using her. Moving on to water, we can apply much the same logic as before, with a few new wrinkles. The water 3-star dragons are Fubuki, Snowdrake, and Wellspring Imp. Fubuki and Snowdrake are pretty much identical to their flame parallels, but Wellspring Imp is one of 3 imps with a buff skill rather than an attack skill. At 4-star and 5-star, we see that water has solid attack and mixed options, but it lacks a good pure HP dragon. Vojanoi and Leviathan specialize in offense, while Poliahu and Poseidon are more balanced, and Mercury, with her nerf stats and ability as a free story dragon, is left to shore up HP. Noteworthy skills include the aforementioned Noble Dance on Wellspring Imp, which boosts defense by 20 or 25% for 15 seconds for the entire team, Lilino's Mist on Poliahu, which can freeze enemies, and Tidal Stream on Leviathan, which can inflict enemies with Bog. Everything else, at least in description, is just an attack. In this case, Leviathan is the clear best option for attackers like Celiera and Lily, followed by Vojanoi and Poseidon, then Poliahu, and finally Fubuki. Tanks and healers like Karina or Ricard are more likely best off with Poseidon or Poliahu since they grant valuable HP while also boosting strength, especially since the HP-focused Mercury is rather weak. Support units like Elisan or Zainfried, as is often the case, are pretty much fine with any of the 4-star or 5-star water gacha dragons. Remember too that since your dragon choices are limited, especially if you're a free-to-play player, it's probably still better to round out your water team with Mercury or a 3-star rather than use an off-element dragon on a water unit. In fact, the 3-star Wellspring Imp deserves a special mention because its skill is one of only 2 dragon skills that buffs team defense, allowing players to trigger any strength and healing double buff abilities on their team. In a very dedicated team composition, this could actually be useful, but it's a bit hard to say that jumping through so many hoops and using a dragon with generally weaker stats would be worth it, especially when a water adventurer, Faniel, already has an innate skill that boosts team defense. So while I think Wellspring Imp is a cool dragon, I doubt that it has many applications. Looking next at Wind, we have Sumuji, Gust Drake, and Zephyr Imp at 3-star. Zephyr Imp's Affinity Dance is another unique skill among dragons, and it boosts team critical rate by 15 or 20% for 10 seconds. At 4-star, the Winds pool includes Midgard Sormer, Rock, and Streebog, so this time around, there's not a great balanced option. Rock and Streebog are amazing for attackers and defenders respectively, however, especially since Rock's skill inflicts stun and Streebog's draws enemies closer to it. The first Wind 5-star is from the gacha pool, Zephyr, and it's another offensive beast on par with Leviathan, only this time its skill inflicts stun rather than Bog. And last but not least, we come to High Midgard Sormer. High Midgard Sormer is going to take some time to unlock and unbind, since the materials needed to do so come from his High Dragon Trial, a quest which can only be undertaken after reaching 13,000 team might, and even then is extremely tough, without the proper preparation. As you can see, however, he has a second ability, increasing dragon time, which makes him unique among all current dragons. If you've already unlocked High Midgard Sormer, you probably don't need my advice, but needless to say, he's very powerful among all wind dragons, especially considering he's a free unit. Since dragons are invulnerable to damage and are powerful attackers themselves, more dragon time is going to be a good thing the vast majority of the time, and High Midgard Sormer's skill also inflicts stun as a cherry on top. Overall, the Wind Dragon pool is one of the most complete in the game right now, only really lacking a healer. High Midgard Sormer is great for basically any wind unit with its balanced abilities. Streebog is fantastic for wind defenders like Ronzel and Johanna, and serviceable for the lone wind healer, Sophie. Zephyr and Rock are superb for attackers like Musashi, Maribel, and especially Hawk thanks to his Stun Punisher ability. And if you don't have any of those dragons yet, well, Midgard Sormer, then the 3-stars are going to be your best choices for now. Pivoting to the Shadow Dragons, we have the 3-stars Hikage, Gloomdrake, and Pallid Imp. This time around, the Imp doesn't have a buff skill, but otherwise, these designs are all pretty much stock. At 4-star, we have Zodiark, Juggernaut, and Silk, with Juggernaut and Zodiark focusing on offense, while Silk brings a mix of HP and strength. Silk serves as a great example of the trade-off between balanced and single-stat dragons. As you can see, in comparison to Juggernaut, Silk can only provide a 20% buff to both stats once fully unbound, or 40% total, while Juggernaut gets to provide a whopping 45% buff to strength once fully unbound. This means that for units with more strength and HP, Silk will never be able to provide as high a total stat increase as Juggernaut does, assuming both dragons are maxed out. Where mixed or balanced 4-star dragons make up for this is that their skills often have secondary effects. We saw this with Poliahu in water, who could inflict freeze. Silk's Terror Sphere likewise has a useful secondary effect. It decreases enemy defense by 10% for a duration not currently reported online. The lone 5-star Shadow Dragon is Nidhogg, and he's also a balanced type whose skill has a useful secondary effect. It inflicts blind. But for 5-star and 3-star dragons, the percentages on the abilities of mixed dragons are at or above parity with those of single stat dragons, so the blindness effect is really just an extra upside. Looking at the Shadow Dragon pool as a whole, it's clearly the shallowest of any element. Nidhogg, then Silk are the best choices for healers like Cleo and Edward, since there's not really a strong HP boosting dragon here. Juggernaut is probably the best for dedicated attackers like Eric and Taro, but Silk and Nidhogg's skills still have enough utility that they're fine options as well. The lone Shadow Defender, Berserker, can also run any of these dragons and be very strong, and the same is generally true of support units. Although, if possible, you really want to run Nidhogg on Nefaria to interact with her Blind Punisher ability. And that brings us to the last element, light. As always, the usual 3 stars are here. This time, Hinata, Moondrake, and Astral Imp, with Astral Imp once again having a unique buff skill among all dragons, Wisdom Dance, which grants strength plus 20 or 25% for 15 seconds. There are 4 4-star light dragons, Jupiter, Lindworm, Unicorn, and Halloween Silk. Jupiter, as expected, is a weaker story dragon, better than the 3-star alternatives in most cases, but worse than Halloween Silk. Silk, like Jupiter and Astral Imp, has a balanced ability, while Lindworm and Unicorn focus on strength and HP respectively. Halloween Silk's skill also lowers enemy strength by 10% for an unknown period, which is pretty good, but generally a bit worse than regular Silk's defense debuff. The last light dragon is the only 5-star one, Jeanne d'Arc, who's currently the only HP-focused 5-star dragon. Her Saint's Banner skill not only deals damage, but it also boosts team defense by 25 or 30% for 15 seconds, which makes it outstanding on teams with Irfan, Ryozan, or others with double buff abilities. As a whole, the light pool is fairly deep, especially so for those units who value extra HP. Jeanne d'Arc and Unicorn are excellent for healers like Hildegard and Halloween Althemia. Lindworm is the best pick for attackers, unless you have a lot more copies of Jeanne d'Arc than Lindworm, in which case her raw stats will also make her a fine choice. And Halloween Silk is a fine choice for tanks, support, or any light unit really, with her balanced stats, quick attack speed, and fairly useful skill. And that's finally all of the dragons in the game, along with my general thoughts on how to use them. Let's go over the main points presented today. Number 1. Always match adventure and dragon element. I've said it before and I'll keep saying it. This is going to be the right thing to do the vast majority of the time. Number 2. Have a plan for your adventure and how you want to use your dragon. This usually means healers will want an HP-focused dragon, attackers will want a strength-focused dragon, and other units will depend on the exact setup and plans you have in mind. Number 3. Within a given focus of strength, HP, or both stats, rarer typically means stronger, and gacha means stronger than free. Also, 3 stars are weak enough that they're not worth it if you have better options. These 3 points should help guide you toward the right dragon with any builds you plan to make, and I've listed them in order of importance. Of course, not everyone has every dragon, so do your best within your constraints, experiment, and see what builds you can come up with.
Pafoo! Victory will be ours!
Alright, that's going to do it for this video. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, consider liking, sharing, or subscribing. I really do appreciate it, and it has helped the channel grow so much the past few months. I'd also love to hear your comments on dragons, your experience using them, and everything else Dragalia Lost. A longer project like this does take some time to create, so I'd be grateful for any feedback you have. Anything you want me to change when I go over weapons and wyrmprints? Let me know with a comment below. With a new raid event and new summon showcase launching next week, I'll do my best to incorporate your input and continue this long-form series as time permits. With that said, thank you once again for watching, and I'll see you next time.